What we're going to look at is the kind of challenge that we're facing in terms of providing investment. At this moment, we have very small investment. For example, take an area like social housing. At the rate we're going, we wouldn't get the current 90,000 households off the waiting list, even with the full government programme that's laid out, which includes a certain amount of off-balance funding. We won't have it eliminated till 2051. And on top of it, and that's assuming then that we are not dealing with anything that happens between now and 2051 in terms of the growing waiting list. So we have to think laterally about this. The National Economic and Social Council has published a very good series of studies on housing in recent months. It makes a quite solid case that I would recommend people to read. So it's not just us that are making the case, it's the point I'm making here. They've made a very good case for off-balance sheet funding of social housing and how it might be done. It involves other things like, for example, moving to cost rental and taking a ceiling off the differential rent system and things of that nature. It's all spelled out there.
Developments of technology in the United States being funded by the state. That is true. I don't think it's true of Apple, to be quite frank. I think Apple was always an outlier in that case. But it is true of Intel, and it is also true of the internet. But they were funded initially by the military. So I'm just saying, if you want a militarized state, you've got to be careful what you wish for when you start in on some of that kind of stuff.
Mariana Mazzucato's book, she has a chapter on Apple. And I think it's quite an interesting chapter and takes away some of the myths hanging around Apple. And I think that part of what we're looking at is an extraordinary rip-off, if you like, of profits. Profits have moved from being stuff that got shared in a much more fair way in a variety of different methodologies and so on, including with workers who are working on these areas. But they've got moved completely into a private sector sphere where the vast majority of the gain is going to the people who make the final piece of the breakthrough at the top of the pyramid, ignoring the fact that it's like an iceberg, that the stuff above the water is only a tip, a small piece. There's Apple, Compaq, Microsoft, and the rest of them. Intel, you're dead right about Intel as well. But it's built on a huge amount of other stuff. Much of it is public investment. So we would say, if that's the case, these guys, we should stop the nonsense of their paying, whether it's 2.5% or 6% or a notional 11.5% that I completely reject as being what they do pay. But what they actually are paying is only a pittance compared to what they should. We need a different model of how gain in that cross substructure is distributed.
So the question is, maybe it's not representative democracy that's necessarily at fault, but it's all the pressures that are brought to bear on it through the 24/7 media.
Yes, I agree with you. I mean, the news agenda is 24/7, but the problem with the 24/7 news agenda means that nothing is really considered or questioned properly, so there's no rational discussion about issues. It's a news agenda and it's gone. So the question we need to ask ourselves, and it's not just for the media, it's for everybody, because people buy into that news agenda then and they switch off when you try to have a discussion around things like taxation, like services, for example, transport. I get the Lewis to work every day, so there were constant letters into the metro complaining about the DART services and the bus services. Yet when you try to have a discussion about public services such as transport and how you might fund them, nobody actually wants to get involved because people have bought into that news agenda. And you're right, it does sort of colonize it, and politics people are seen as good or bad. You're either pro-government or anti-government, but there's no rational consideration of policies and how everybody in the political system might actually work together to build a more sustainable future.
Just to add to that, there's the issue that the media has always been controlled by either the politically powerful or the economically powerful. And what we have seen in more recent times is the politically powerful handing control over to the economically powerful and creating rules about all sorts of things, about privatisation and stuff, that have driven that in that particular way. So it wasn't modern media only that sort of drove this agenda. This agenda goes back to Reagan and Thatcher at the start of the 1980s. And there was no social media and there was no great internet access except for the military had it at the time, which is the point, but nobody else had it. And whatever. So there's a quite serious set of issues there. The other piece is about deliberative democracy. I would be strongly of the view that people want to be engaged in shaping decisions that affect them. But what they are resisting is being involved in a charade, pretending that they're being consulted. And I know, for example, as part of the community and voluntary sector, there's been endless consultation about how to support and finance it, but it always leads to cuts in the money that's available. And the people at the end of the day realize all that's going on is a tick box exercise, that we tick the box that we talk to the people, but after that we did what we intended to do in the first place, which is the same kind of approach that produced Irish Water and a whole lot of other stuff on which causes to fall on top of our heads. I would argue very strongly that most people want to be involved, engaged in shaping decisions that affect them. That's the basis, by the way, on which the public participation networks at local government level are now built. We'll see whether, first of all, the process is able to engage with them, because a lot of the implementation has been spotty in the sense that it's quite a challenge at a local level, even for the officials to understand a system other than the one that's represented. This is a more deliberative process. And the second thing is, if we actually had a deliberative process in terms of social dialogue, I would make a very strong claim that we wouldn't have made a lot of the mistakes that have been made in recent times, including the fiasco that is Irish Water.